JJ, I'm just going to go with that for the name, says, why do we not explain the first two verses with point pause? First, he made everything. Point. Next, the earth was a mess. Point. But his spirit moved above the face of the waters. Now, in the third verse is when, according to every translation, God started to organize the world. He then rested after 6 days.
So,
do you want to clarify this question? As there's a lot written there. Can you give a short summary of what that's really the essence of what this is asking?
So, first, it is a deep. There's a lot of layers, and JJ, you're very observant, and I'm glad you asked this because I wouldn't know what you're asking if it wasn't for the fact that I'm personally been trying to translate Genesis 1 for myself from Hebrew to English. And I'm not some genius. I don't have special training, but I'm just using the resources available on Blue Letter Bible. And you could do that too. And it really transformed my understanding even of these verses. So I know what you're talking about. So let's take it from the beginning. How does this verse start in Genesis 1? It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Is this telling us about one particular creation, and then when we go forward, are we hearing about a different creation? Or is this a summary, a recap of what's about to come? I think that's going to be a part of answering what JJ's asking. So maybe if you're watching right now, what do you think? Is in the beginning God created, is that a summary, an intro, or is that telling us about one creation, and then we learn about additional creations going on?
This is so far over my head. I don't even know where to start.
So yeah. First, let's. Tina.
Oh no! all I was going to say was just when I took an anthropology class in college, and they were suggesting that the Bible has multiple creation stories, and I remember their explanation of it, and I was just like, no, I don't think so. But I'm anxious to hear what you have to share about this, because I definitely heard different sides of this story.
Yeah, and you're right. This is something that is debated, but let's go into history. First, we understand Moses was the one that wrote this, and was everybody able to read back in those days?
Probably not.
I don't know. He probably knew how to read and write because he was trained by the Egyptians who had the hieroglyphics, and he was probably one of the first Hebrews to ever know how to write. Heard some fascinating archaeology discussions about that. But what we have here is probably something that's going to be passed on orally. So when you start the story, just think of like how Star Wars starts. Long, long ago in a country or in a galaxy far, far away. That's sort of setting the stage. I think it's the same thing here too. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that word for heaven is Shemayim. It can mean heaven singular or it can mean heaven plural. And when we think heaven, what do we tend to think of nowadays?
Where God lives.
Yeah, we tend to think of where God lives and, where the saints will be taken, that sort of place. But heaven, most of the time in the New Testament, or Old Testament, sorry, is actually referring to the skies, what we call, and also probably what we call outer space. And the Hebrews also had a third heaven, which that's where God's domain was. So they sort of had three levels of heaven: sky, outer space, and then God's domain. So we're going to look at the context here of Shemayim in even in Genesis 1, and it'll answer that. So heavens and the earth, that's the eris, the earth. And that usually is going to mean not what we think. When we think earth, what do we think?
Ground. We think the planet.
The planet. We think planet Earth. In the minds of these people, they've, back in the day, maybe they understood the earth was round, but nobody really circumnavigated it. They had never launched a satellite and got an imagery of it. So their perspective of what Earth is going to be different than what we think it is. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If we look at the next verse, Genesis 2, maybe we could put that up. And so, and the earth, so that's the eris, again, the Hebrew word eris, was void and without form, and darkness was over the face of the deep. So now the questioner was JJ was saying, you know, hey, we're told God created, and now God's showing up, and there's something there, right? It's talking about the earth, it was without form or void, but it was there, right? So it's true that God created before even we get to Genesis verse 2. So there was a creation. It was something was existing, but elsewhere we're told God created things that weren't there. And if you flash ahead actually to Exodus 20,
Maybe we could pull that up.
yeah, Exodus 20 verse 11. It says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that was with them. And the seventh day God rested." So earth, sea, and heavens, it said all three were made within 7 days or 6 days. We can feel pretty comfortable then that Genesis 1 does sort of encapsulate that there was a creation before we got to Genesis 1 verse 2. There was water so that God passed over it. But technically the earth was still unformed. It was void. Think of it like Play-Doh that a kid just takes out of the Play-Doh holder. And if you go up to the kid and ask, what is this? He'll say, it's nothing, right? I mean, it's Play-Doh, but it's nothing. It hasn't been formed. It hasn't been shaped. Same concept here. The earth was just covered, earth as we call it, was covered in water. You know, the presence of God passed over the deep. Same word as abyss in the New Testament when it talks about the bottomless pit. That's the same terminology there that's talking about. So the earth in its unbuilt, uncreated form, in a sense, is just this big ball of water. And then if we go on to the next verse in Genesis 3, what do we see? Maybe we could put that up. Sorry, Genesis 1 verse 3. God said, "Let there be light." So it was darkness. Now he's bringing light. The person who asked the question talked about, in a sense, that the earth was chaotic. And that's true. It was maximum entropy, what we would call today, right? Maximum chaos, because nothing was formed, nothing was shaped. It's just you let something just fizzle down. If you empty a cup of water and just spills over, that's sort of your maximum entropy. And light and energy is kind of opposite of entropy. Now God's bringing order into it, and this order is going to keep going. The next thing God creates is going to be He separates the waters. So there was already a lot of water, but now God puts water up in the heaven, and God puts water down at the bottom. And one He calls sky, but that verse that says sky, that word actually is shemayim that we talked about earlier, that we use for heaven. So He's calling the sky heaven, and then the lower part, or the firmament, He calls it. There's this vault, something holding it up. They actually believed that there was lots of water above them, and they thought more like an aquarium. Imagine having a giant aquarium above your head, you know, and the word, you know, if that thing sprung a leak, how disastrous that would be. And so when the flood comes around, oh no, this is terrible. That aquarium over our heads now has sprung a leak. They probably panicked on a level that we can't even comprehend.
Didn't just spring one leak, it's spraying a million leaks.
Yeah, it's all at once and then just pouring down. So, so we get to now the third day of creation, and that's when God separates the waters from the earth, the dry land. That's what it's really talking about. So when we go back to Genesis 1, and it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, What it's really talking about is in the beginning, during that time, God created the sky, outer space, and he created the dry land. It's not specifying when God actually created the waters. But as I mentioned, Exodus 20, verse 1 does say in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth and the waters, and the sea. And if you go to Revelation 14:7, similarly, it talks about how God created the heavens, the earth, the sea, the fountains of water. So when exactly was the water created? The fair guess is it was within those 7 days of creation. But we're not given those words. We're not told about how that came about. We start off with the ball of water existed, that ball of potential that was in darkness, and then God brought it into light. God formed it, he shaped it, made it what it is. In a sense, sort of parallel to then how God takes dirt, forms Adam, makes him what he is. Or how he takes us, how we're broken, we're in darkness, and he brings us into light and shapes us.
Yeah. And just if I could just add, just to kind of go along with what you're saying, that kind of reminds me, because I think what I'm understanding is, some people think that, was the beginning, the beginning of the, everything, heaven where God lives, and the earth, the earth where we live, like that was the beginning of everything. And I think based on what you're saying is, no, there was already something in existence. It was just at the beginning of our world, or our earth is kind of what Genesis chapter 1 is talking about. And if you look at like Proverbs chapter 8, it's talking about Jesus. And it says in verse 22, it says, the Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way before his works of old. So before the earth, Jesus was in existence with the Father. And in verse 23, it says, I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills were brought forth.
Let's pause that right there. See, that's great. Right there, where it says before there are even depths. So right there, that's talking about the waters that existed, that abyss, that chaotic mess of waves and everything. And that right there is showing, there was a time when that didn't exist. God brought it into existence. That's great.
So just to kind of, give, we're 2 or 3 witnesses, then, and I see that the director is pointing out when. So there's a time that these things happen, and there's succession of time. And, before all these things, God existed, and God had works of old that we don't even know about. So, definitely there's more to this universe and God's creation that we can't even imagine. And I can't wait till we get to heaven and get to see a lot of things. God says, eye has not seen nor ear heard what the Lord has prepared for them that love him. And I can't wait to see it.
Amen.